The vaulted ceiling of the grand conclave of Xylos stretched into an impossible obsidian gloom, kilometers above the polished floor where the assembled delegates of the ascendancy stood. It was not merely a chamber. It was a monument to millennia of calculated dominance, its architecture designed to oppress, to remind every petitioner of the sheer, suffocating weight of Xylosian dominion. Light filtered through vast, crystalline matrices suspended near the apex, descended in slow, geometric beams, illuminating the somber, multi-limbed forms of the delegates who now faced the central holographic dais. The air itself felt thick, vibrating with the unresolved tension of impending cosmic decisions, a stagnant medium only disturbed by the low, resonant thrum of the planet's life support systems. Across the expanse, the elder counselor Xylos, his carapace the color of aged nebulae, leaned slightly upon his focusing staff, the movement echoing unnaturally loud in the profound silence that followed the last, frantic transmission from the outer sectors. He watched the shimmering, imperfect projection hanging above the dais, a projection compiled from intercepted tactical data, behavioral analyses, and the terrified, fragmented reports of systems that had already ceased broadcasting. This projection depicted the arrival vector, the initial deployment patterns, and the chillingly minimal defensive response of the newly designated entity, humanity. The apprehension gripping the assembled minds of the ascendancy was palpable, a low-frequency psychic hum that Xylos, as a seasoned political survivor, could almost taste, a bitter, metallic tang of obsolescence and fear, a sensation the ascendancy had not permitted itself to experience since the Great Unification cycle. They had dealt with threats before, the swarming, suicidal zealots of the Cygnus Vale, the calculating, purely logical conquest drives of the Krill hegemony, the vast, silent indifference of the void Leviathans. Each had been met with superior strategy, devastating weaponry calibrated over eons of refinement, and the unshakable belief in Xylosian supremacy. But humanity defied easy categorization. Their arrival was not a calculated expansion, but a sudden, disruptive intrusion, like a shard of unknown, intensely hot matter impacting a perfectly cooled mechanism. The initial probes sent to ascertain their motives had simply vanished, not with a bang or a recorded failure signal, but with an abrupt, absolute cessation of all data flow, leaving behind only the faint, inexplicable echo of extreme energetic transference. "The silence is becoming untenable," hissed Delegate Vroon of the expansionist bloc, his vocalizations cutting the stillness like shattered glass. Vroon's auditory stalks twitched rapidly, a sign of extreme agitation translated across the visual spectrum into a faint, rapid flickering of his lower carapace segments. "We have dedicated entire solar sectors to monitoring the periphery of their claimed ingress zone for 3 full rotations of the central sun, and what do we receive? Ambiguity. Uncertainty is a vulnerability the ascendancy cannot afford to display to the newly emergent. We must enact Protocol Omega 9, full mobilization, demonstrate the true scope of our deterrent capabilities before their novelty solidifies into perceived strength." Vroon's voice carried the raw, unvarnished arrogance of a species whose ancestors had mastered the manipulation of spacetime before the Xylosian core worlds had even achieved stable fusion. He saw weakness in caution, mistook introspection for paralysis. He looked upon the vague sensor ghosts of the human vessels, the distant, almost negligible energy signatures, and saw only soft targets awaiting the inevitable application of Xylosian overwhelming force. Elder Counselor Xylos turned his massive, multifaceted visual array slowly towards Vroon, the movement deliberate, weighty with the accumulated history of his lineage. "Patience, Vroon. Patience is not paralysis. It is the observation of consequence before the application of action. You speak of Protocol Omega 9, the indiscriminate application of system-wide saturation weaponry, the very instrument designed to sterilize the most defiant rogue elements. Do you truly believe this is the appropriate initial response to an entity whose capabilities remain entirely unknown? The last civilization that met an unknown with sheer, arrogant firepower found their tactical doctrine rendered obsolete within a single engagement. We must comprehend the intent before we commit to the finality of extinction." Xylos paused, allowing the gravity of his words to settle into the collective subconscious of the chamber. The ancient wisdom dictated that any power capable of breaching the galactic quarantine markers without triggering the standard early warning cascade deserved a measure of respect, however grudgingly given. The quarantine markers were not mere navigational buoys. They were interwoven with the fabric of known physics, their violation suggesting a mastery over fundamental forces that even the Ascendancy had only theorized about in their most esoteric research divisions. From the shadowed periphery of the conclave, where the delegation from the Bureau of Interstellar Ethics maintained a customary, almost monastic distance, rose Delegate Threll. Threll's form was slender, draped in heavy, light-absorbing silks, representative of a culture that valued internalized philosophy over external display of might. Threll rarely spoke during military debates, preferring the quiet corridors of jurisprudence and cultural integration. Elder Counselor speaks with wisdom. The projection shows movement, yes, but movement devoid of discernible pattern, devoid of the recognizable signatures of expansionist or defensive maneuvering we have catalogued across uncountable millennia. Their energy emissions are clean. Too clean. They do not leak waste heat. They do not leave the characteristic energetic wake of conventional faster-than-light transit. They arrive, and then they are there. This suggests a mastery of transition so complete that engaging them with kinetic or even localized energy projections may be akin to striking at the shadow of an object, while the object itself resides in another dimension entirely. Threll's voice was smooth, a carefully modulated baritone that suggested deep study and profound unease. If they possess the theoretical keys to dimensional displacement at this scale, then Omega-9 is not merely a risk. It is an invitation to self-destruction, inviting a retaliation we cannot predict, much less counter. The debate spiraled, an eddy of intellectual conflict within the still, vast room. The diplomats argued for observation, the strategists for preemptive dominance, and the xenolinguists for the futile effort of initial contact protocols, already deemed too slow. The prevailing mood remained one of profound disquiet rooted in the incomprehensible nature of the human arrival. Their initial probes, tiny scouts crafted with a rudimentary appearance that belied their actual composition, had moved with a fluid indifference to established navigational principles. They had not navigated through space. They had simply occupied the destination coordinates. Reports spoke of their vessels, hulking dark structures that absorbed ambient light rather than reflecting it, possessing internal environments maintained at temperatures and pressures utterly toxic to nearly every known life form in the Ascendancy. Yet they broadcasted signals indicating stable, optimal conditions within. The very concept was a profound violation of established universal constants as understood by Xylosian science. They were an anomaly defying known physics, and in the meticulously ordered universe of the Ascendancy, anomalies were excised, not integrated. Xylos projected a complex set of data streams onto the central dais, overwriting the tactical map with historical analogs. We faced the Vorlag hegemony during the age of static expansion. They, too, seemed to operate outside the accepted parameters of their stellar nursery. We responded with the Sun-Cleaver array. The Vorlag ceased to exist. We faced the self-replicating nanite clouds of the Gliese drift. We countered with localized temporal distortion fields. The drift vanished from the continuum. In every instance, our analysis, though perhaps slow, was ultimately correct because the enemy operated within the recognizable confines of causality. Humanity does not appear to. Look here. Xylos focused the projection onto a single, extremely high-resolution image captured during the brief, catastrophic interaction with the first Xylosian deep-range reconnaissance drone. The image showed a single human vessel, small relative to the Ascendancy's standard cruiser class, yet perfectly silhouetted against the blazing heart of a blue giant star it seemed entirely unconcerned by. The drone's final telemetry indicated that the human ship had not fired a weapon, nor had it deployed any visible energy field. It had merely accelerated. And the drone, built of layered, hyperdense alloys designed to withstand core collapse pressures, had simply disintegrated, its atomic bonds seemingly unzipped by the sheer kinetic potential of that acceleration, a process that should have taken centuries to achieve even a fraction of the measured velocity. They accelerate without discernible fuel expenditure, and they withstand stellar radiation without visible shielding, whispered a newly risen delegate, a deep space physicist whose specialty was usually the mapping of dark matter currents, not existential threats. Their mastery is not in weaponry, but in fundamental manipulation of inertia and environment. They are not playing the game of energy projection. They are playing the game of existence. The fear transmuted from political caution into existential dread. The Ascendancy's strength lay in its predictable application of overwhelming, calibrated force. If the enemy was fundamentally unpredictable, then every fleet, Every station, every strategic outpost became a potential grave. For 3 more cycles of intense, silent debate, the Council wrestled with the implications, the internal psychic pressures mounting until the air in the conclave seemed to shimmer with unreleased potential. Finally, Xylos made a decision that bypassed all standing protocol, a gamble born of desperation masquerading as supreme confidence. We cease immediate escalation. We cease all kinetic posturing. We prepare a single diplomatic envoy, the Arbiter's Mantle, to cross the demarcation line designated by humanity's initial brief transmission. A transmission that was, itself, an act of unilateral declaration of presence. We will meet them on their terms to understand the nature of the force we face. Vroon, your eagerness for conflict is noted, but for now, you will ensure the mobilization fleets remain at standby, designated for defense only. Threll, you will accompany the Arbiter's Mantle. Your detachment from martial impulse is what we require. If this is a cultural misinterpretation, you will be our bridge. If this is a genuine, unparalleled existential threat, your calm objectivity may be the last anchor to sanity. The decision was met with a wave of reluctant assent. The Ascendancy was about to send its most revered diplomatic vessel, protected by minimal escort, a gesture of profound, almost suicidal deference, into the void claimed by the unknown. The journey took longer than anticipated, not because of distance, but because the Arbiter's Mantle had to navigate the very edges of known space, adhering strictly to the arbitrary, non-Euclidean boundary markers broadcast by the humans. Boundaries that seemed to shift slightly based on the viewing angle of the observing ship. When the Arbiter's Mantle finally crossed the threshold, the effect was immediate and absolute. The ambient energy readings, the background radiation, the static of the cosmic microwave, dropped to near zero. The ship's internal chronometers, synchronized with the Zalosian core standard, stuttered, then resynchronized with an external alien time reference that seemed unnervingly precise. Ahead, bathed in the sterile, unforgiving light of a distant, unremarkable yellow sun, hung the human fleet. It was not the chaotic, aggressively bristling formation Xylos had feared, nor the minimalist stealth approach his analysts had hypothesized. It was an ordered, almost pastoral arrangement of immense, silent vessels. They were colossal, but their scale was not immediately apparent, for they were clad in a matte, charcoal-gray material that drank the light, making them appear less like active constructs and more like massive, slowly moving shadows cast against the backdrop of space. There were no visible weapon emplacements, no flashing sensor arrays, no external maneuvering thrusters venting plasma. They simply were, holding position with an immutable geological stillness. The centerpiece, positioned precisely at the center of the formation, was one vessel significantly larger than the others, yet it possessed no aggressive contours. It looked unsettlingly like a vast, perfectly smooth, elongated cylinder, dwarfing even the largest Zalosian capital ships. "Data streams confirm life support integrity," reported the Mantle's bridge commander, his voice tight with professional dread. "No active targeting locks registered from any of their platforms. They are displaying a passive posture, Counselor Threll. But the sheer mass, the energy required to maintain this volume of material in stable orbit suggests resources beyond our known cosmological accounting." Threll, standing on the bridge overlooking the void, felt the psychic weight of the human presence press upon his species, accumulated knowledge. It was the feeling of confronting a truth so fundamental that the very axioms of his reality seemed to warp. This was not a military force. It was a projection of authority, expressed through sheer, unchallengeable scale and technological singularity. Then, a signal. Not a broadcast in any known frequency band, but a directed quantum entanglement transmission that bypassed all conventional shielding and materialized directly into the primary processors of the Arbiter's Mantle. It carried no aggression, no threat, only a single, pristine packet of data accompanied by an instructional overlay. A universal Rosetta Stone translator, tailored perfectly to Xylosian linguistic structure, adapting to their complex agglutinative syntax in a matter of moments. The message appeared first as pure mathematics, a foundational truth, before resolving into perfect, formal Xylosian script on the main view screen. "To the collective entities present, we acknowledge your arrival at the designated zone of observation. We extend conditional diplomatic invitation to a secure staging area designated Station Harmony. Our intent is communication, not conflict. Proceed on Vector Gamma 739er. Compliance is not mandatory, but deviation will be treated as a refusal to engage. The message was signed not with a name or a species designation, but with a simple, stark symbol, a perfect, balanced circle bisected by a straight line. Threll felt a strange calm descend. This was not the bluster of a rising power, nor the measured threat of an established empire. This was the cold, precise language of a superior entity setting the terms of engagement for a subordinate. There was no implied menace, because the threat was simply implied by their existence. "Commander," Threll stated, his voice regaining its measured cadence, "acknowledge receipt. Confirm adherence to the specified vector. Prepare the mantle for low-energy passive transit. We proceed to Station Harmony." The journey toward the designated station was short, yet felt interminable. Station Harmony was not a military base or a glittering capital. It was a structure of profound, almost brutal utilitarianism, a vast, rotating torus assembled from dull, seamless metal, seemingly built overnight from raw stellar materials. It bore no markings of decoration or history, existing only to fulfill its single function, to be a meeting point. As the Arbiter's mantle docked in a receiving bay large enough to house a small moon, the silence returned, heavy and complete. The delegation that greeted them was small, 3 human figures, utterly unremarkable in their appearance to the Xylosian sensory apparatus. They wore simple, functional gray suits that appeared to offer no environmental protection, and their faces, the focus of so much speculation, were startlingly symmetrical, devoid of obvious ornamentation or secondary sensory organs. They stood perfectly still, exhibiting an unnerving control over their biological processes, emitting no measurable stress signals. Leading them was a female human, identified by the quantum signal as the primary interlocutor, designated Ambassador Kalen. She approached the docking aperture with a slow, deliberate gait that seemed to measure every centimeter of the space between them. When the primary airlock cycled, the atmosphere rushing in to meet the Xylosian containment field with an almost aggressive neutrality, Ambassador Kalen spoke. Her voice, rendered through the universal translator, was clear, resonant, and completely devoid of inflection, conveying absolute authority through sheer clarity. "Counselor Threll, Elder Representative Xylos' delegation, welcome to the Provisional Contact Zone. We appreciate your timely compliance with our initiation parameters." Threll stepped forward, his multiple limbs moving with practiced elegance, projecting the dignity of his ancient race. "Ambassador Kalen, we are here to understand the nature of your arrival and your intentions regarding the established territories of the Ascendancy. Your methods of entry bypassed all known physical invariants. We seek knowledge." Kalen inclined her head fractionally, a gesture Threll recognized from ancient, almost forgotten cultural archives as a symbol of recognition, not subservience. "Intention is simple, peaceful engagement under terms of mutual recognition of capability. Method requires explanation, which is not currently prioritized. We understand your apprehension. We are aware of the Ascendancy's long-standing geopolitical structure and its reliance on predictable physical laws. We will address your primary concern first, capability." She gestured toward the expansive interior of the staging station, revealing not a grand throne room, but a minimalist, vast hall dominated by a central holographic projector. The images it displayed were not of weapons, but of stellar cartography rendered in a complexity that immediately overloaded the Xylosian sensor specialists aboard the mantle. "The Ascendancy possesses mastery over the local gravitational constant within its core systems, correct?" Kalen asked. This was an assumption the Ascendancy guarded with fanaticism, a secret refinement developed over millennia to ensure their planetary defenses remained unbreachable. Threll hesitated, then confirmed, his internal processors racing to calculate the threat level of an adversary who knew their most fundamental secrets without having traversed their core territories. "We maintain localized control, yes. It is a cornerstone of our defense." "Precisely," Kalen affirmed. The projection shifted, displaying a visualization of a completely different, distant galaxy, one the Ascendancy believed to be entirely uncontactable due to the vast, dark energy voids separating it from their own arm of the spiral. "The Xylosian method involves the localized manipulation of the field gradient, requiring immense, near-impossible energy input for displacement. Our method involves understanding the fabric of the continuum as a navigable medium, not a barrier. We do not manipulate the field, We move within the flow. The display then focused on a region of that distant galaxy, highlighting several massive, swirling clouds of chaotic energy, regions the Ascendancy had long categorized as uninteresting, dead space, too energetically volatile for navigation or habitation. These are regions you designated as irreconcilable entropy zones? Correct. Areas where the natural decay of the universe accelerates to an unsustainable rate for complex structures. Kalen's tone remained utterly level, yet the implication hung heavy in the sterile air. That is correct, Threll managed. They are functionally impassable, eternal dead ends. They are, in fact, shortcuts, Kalen stated. The projection zoomed in, and the Zalosian specialists aboard the mantle gasped, a sound Threll registered with a detached, professional horror. The image resolved to show structures within the entropy zones, vast, perfectly geometric constructions, clearly artificial, humming with suppressed energy that defied the local decay. They were megastructures built into the very heart of cosmic ruin. What you are observing, Kalen continued, her voice a calm eulogy for the Ascendancy's self-perception, are the remnants of civilizations that faced the same limitations you did. They sought to conquer the void by brute force. They failed. They learned eventually that the universe is not a physical structure to be fought, but an informational state to be navigated. These structures are observation posts, abandoned by those who reach the final understanding before their own localized collapse. We have been studying their logs for centuries. We did not need to cross the void. We needed to understand the rules of the void. Your initial military probes vanished because they entered a low-level phase displacement field we use for calibration. It was not an attack. It was a diagnostic test that was misinterpreted. The revelation was a physical blow to the Zalosian delegation. Their entire strategic posture, their millennia of paranoia and military refinement, was based on a misunderstanding of physics so fundamental that it rendered their most advanced weaponry obsolete before it could even be armed. They had prepared for a war of attrition against a sophisticated empire. They had found a civilization operating on a completely different plane of reality, one that viewed the Ascendancy's mastery of gravity as akin to a child learning to roll a stone down a hill. You speak of abandoned civilizations, Threll asked, fighting to anchor his consciousness in the present moment, ignoring the rising tide of cultural shock. You imply a continuity of knowledge spanning vast gulfs of space and time. If you possess this knowledge, why arrive now with such a direct, if passive, demonstration? Why not reveal yourselves before? Kalen stepped closer, her gray suit absorbing the ambient light, drawing all focus to her calm, unreadable face. Because, Counselor Threll, the Ascendancy has reached the predicted point of its next great strategic decision, either to consolidate its known territory through aggressive expansion, thereby increasing its energetic signature and attracting a different kind of attention, or to pause, reflect, and seek novel solutions to universal constants. You are at the precipice of making a self-limiting choice based on outdated threat models. Our arrival is a necessary intervention to shift that calculus before you lock yourselves into a doomed evolutionary path. The ethical depth of the statement was staggering. They had not come to conquer or trade or subjugate. They had come to nudge a civilization away from a perceived future self-destruction based on superior, objective analysis of cosmic history. This was a level of proactive, ethical engagement that the Ascendancy, steeped in self-interest and regional dominance, found almost impossible to process. The human ambassador then presented the second, larger reveal. The holographic display dissolved the distant galaxy and zoomed back to the immediate vicinity of the human fleet, now slightly repositioned to allow an unimpeded view of the void behind them, the direction from which the humans had not come, but the direction they were now subtly obscuring. We are not the apex of this knowledge, Kalen stated, and for the first time a sliver of something that might have been solemnity, or perhaps just optimized vocal tone entered her speech. We are students. Our arrival was not a declaration of ownership, but an urgent notification. For the last 2 standard Zylosian centuries, while you perfected your localized gravity wells, we have been receiving a signal. It is not a language. It is an instruction set, a complex, self-propagating algorithm originating from outside the observable limits of this cosmic structure. It is a beacon, but not one meant for us or for you. The image sharpened, focusing on a point far beyond the furthest stars visible to the Zylosian instruments, a direction that felt physically painful to attempt to observe. At that point, a distortion appeared, Not a gravitational distortion, nor an energy signature, but a tear in the visual fabric of space, a non-color that seemed to be the absence of all potential. This signal is a distress call issued by something ancient, something that predates the formation of the organized galactic structures we both inhabit, Kalen explained. It is a warning. It speaks of a force that consumes structure, that finds complexity and order inherently wasteful. It consumes energy, yes, but more importantly, it consumes information. It strips reality down to its most basic, uniform state. Threll felt the final vestige of his arrogance crumble, replaced by a cold, clear focus of shared peril. The human intervention was suddenly clear. The Ascendancy's predictable, high-energy military posturing would have made them a far more visible, far more attractive target for whatever this cosmic entropy was. Humanity had arrived not as a threat, but as a harbinger, forcing a premature, necessary alliance based on a threat so large, it rendered all previous political differences irrelevant. You have positioned your fleet to act as a shield, Threll realized, the thought forming with terrifying clarity. You arrived here, displaying an overwhelming, yet passive display of force to establish a barrier of complexity and non-compliance between the Ascendancy and this, encroaching uniformity. Correct, Kalen confirmed. Your military might, while primitive by our standards, is highly complex in its organization and energy profile. It is an anomaly that could draw attention. Our goal is to integrate your strategic capabilities rapidly into a unified, highly adaptable defense perimeter that will present a unified front, a chaotic, unpredictable wall of integrated biological and technological will against this signal source. We cannot fight it by being stronger. We must fight it by being unpredictable on a scale they cannot model. We need your physicists to understand localized gravitational stress points, and we need your strategic depth to manage the perimeter. The time for political maneuvering is over. The time for survival united has begun. The silence that descended upon the station was different from the dread in the Xylo's conclave. It was the silence of profound acceptance, of a species that, when faced with true meaning, finally dropped the pretense of petty supremacy. Threll turned back toward the secure comms link that connected him instantaneously to Elder Counselor Xylos and the Grand Conclave. He did not need to speak aloud for Xylos to perceive the shift in his psychological state, the crushing weight of uncertainty replaced by the sharp, defining clarity of a singular, shared purpose. Elder Counselor, Threll projected directly into the council chamber, his thoughts now laced with the calm logic of the human ambassador. The threat is not external political opposition. It is cosmological oblivion. They are not here to challenge our existence. They are here to ensure its continuation. Their power is not in weaponry, but in foresight. They have saved us from ourselves. We must accept their terms not as subordinates, but as newly awakened partners in the ultimate struggle. The vast, kilometer-high ceiling of the conclave suddenly seemed less oppressive, less a symbol of ancient, stagnant power, and more a container for a shared, uncertain future. The fire of the initial conflict, the fear of the unknown, had not engulfed the battlefield. It had merely illuminated the true enemy waiting patiently in the dark beyond the furthest light. Humanity, underestimated as a nascent power, was revealed as the desperate ethical vanguard, forcing an unlikely unity against a threat that erased all prior definitions of conflict, leaving only the stark, essential need to be. The cinematic tension had resolved, not into a battle, but into a stark, profound alliance forged at the very edge of existence, facing a darkness so absolute that even the stars seemed to hold their breath. The journey ahead was not one of conquest, but of desperate, unified survival against the final, silent erasure.